Ozzy sat in his dimly lit study, the faint hum of old concert recordings playing in the background. The walls were covered with decades of memorabilia: posters, vinyl records, backstage passes, and photographs that captured the chaos and glory of a life spent on the road. He reached for a dusty leather-bound box tucked away in the corner, the kind he hadn't opened in years. Flipping through old tour schedules and faded Polaroids, a small photograph fell to the floor. It was a candid shot from backstage during the Blizzard of Oz tour, laughter frozen in time, guitars leaning against amps, Ozzy himself caught mid-smile. But what caught his attention wasn't him. It was a young man standing off to the side, grinning with a mischievous spark in his eyes. Ozzy picked up the photo, squinting at the name scribbled faintly on the back. Tommy, Roadie extraordinaire. The name stirred something deep inside him. He hadn't thought about Tommy in decades, not since the tours, the late-night gigs, the long drives between cities, and the endless days of setting up and tearing down stages. Where had Tommy gone? What had become of him? For the first time in years, a pang of curiosity mixed with guilt crept into Ozzy's chest. He realized he had lost contact with someone who had been a quiet but essential part of his journey, a loyal companion through the highs and lows of rock, roll life. The thought of reconnecting sparked an unexpected excitement. Ozzy leaned back, holding the photo close, and whispered to himself, "After all these years, I wonder where you are, Tommy." Little did he know, this small discovery would lead to a reunion that nobody, including Ozzy, could have anticipated. The next morning, Ozzy couldn't shake the memory of Tommy's photograph. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that mischievous grin, that spark of life that had made long, grueling tours just a little brighter. Ozzy knew he had to find him. 40 years had passed, and yet, the thought of reconnecting with someone who had shared so much of his journey filled him with an unexpected urgency. He began the search the old-fashioned way. Phone calls were made to mutual friends, band members, and anyone who might have had contact with Tommy over the decades. Some numbers had been disconnected, others had gone silent, and a few led nowhere. Each failed attempt made the search feel heavier, but Ozzy was determined. He refused to let 40 years of silence erase the bond they had shared. Ozzy even scoured social media, typing in every variation of Tommy's name, hoping that a profile picture or a shared post might give him a lead. Every scrolling hour brought frustration, yet also small sparks of hope: a vague post in a fan group, a comment from someone who remembered the old tours. He scribbled down every clue, every hint, connecting them like pieces of a puzzle. As the search dragged on, memories flooded back. He remembered the first tour they did together, Tommy hauling amps in the freezing rain, cracking jokes even when Ozzy was exhausted after a 3-hour set. He remembered late-night conversations about music, life and dreams, conversations that were now a bittersweet reminder of time lost. Tommy hadn't just been a roadie. He had been a companion through the chaos, a silent anchor in the whirlwind of fame and adrenaline. Weeks passed. Ozzy became almost obsessive. He pulled out every old journal, every tour ledger, trying to trace Tommy's movements after their last tour together. Names, cities, venues, all were revisited in painstaking detail. Some leads were dead ends. Some were heart-stoppingly close but ultimately faded away. It was like chasing a ghost through decades of history. One night, sitting in his study, with a cup of tea growing cold in his hands, Ozzy found a forgotten backstage pass stuck between the pages of a worn notebook. The date was nearly 40 years ago, and scrawled on the back was a phone number he hadn't dialed in decades. His heart raced. Could this be it? Could this finally lead him to Tommy? With trembling hands, Ozzy dialed the number. Each ring echoed in the quiet room like a drum beat of anticipation. Someone answered on the fourth ring, a voice he didn't recognize. He stammered for a moment, unsure of how to explain why he was calling after so long. "My name's Ozzy. I'm looking for Tommy. He used to be my roadie. I don't know if he's still around." There was a pause on the line, long enough for doubt to creep in. Then came a voice, cautious but familiar. "Ozzy, is that really you?" Ozzy's chest tightened. After all these years, after so many missed chances and lost contacts, the search was finally leading somewhere. The voice on the other end carried traces of recognition, of shared memories from long ago. A part of him feared disappointment, but another part knew that some bonds, once formed, never truly break. By the next morning, Ozzy had arranged a tentative meeting. A cafe near a quiet street, chosen for privacy. He rehearsed what he would say, though he knew words could never capture 40 years of memories, laughter, and shared struggles. The anticipation gnawed at him. But it was a good kind of anxiety, the kind that comes with hope, with the possibility of something long overdue. For Ozzy, the search had become more than just finding a friend. It was a journey back in time, a reminder of who he was before fame and chaos, before the crowds and the screaming fans. It was a chance to reconnect, not only with Tommy, but with a part of himself that had been tucked away behind decades of music and madness. Little did he know, when they finally met, the reunion would not just be about nostalgia. Something unexpected, something no one could have predicted, awaited him. And it would change both their lives forever. As Ozzy waited for the day of the meeting, he found himself lost in memories he hadn't thought about in decades. Sitting alone in his study, he opened a worn notebook filled with scribbled tour notes, set lists, and doodles from long nights on the road. Each page was a portal back in time, a reminder of the chaos, the laughter, and the bond he had shared with Tommy, his forgotten roadie. Images flashed in his mind, long nights at venues where the air smelled of sweat, smoke, and electric guitars. He remembered Tommy hauling amps through rain-soaked streets, never complaining, always grinning even when exhaustion threatened to take over. He remembered the pranks, the time Tommy swapped Ozzy's microphone with a squeaky toy mid-show, leaving Ozzy screaming into the tiny squeak, while the crowd roared with laughter. There were harder memories, too. Ozzy recalled the late-night arguments about schedules, missed flights, and equipment failures. They had endured technical disasters together, sometimes arguing until dawn, only to laugh hours later while setting up another impossible stage. It had been these moments of shared struggle that had forged a trust deeper than words could describe. Tommy wasn't just a roadie. He had been a friend who stood by Ozzy through the madness of fame, the exhaustion of touring, and the weight of expectations. The thought of reconnecting after 40 years, however, brought a tight knot to Ozzy's chest. Was it too late? Could they bridge the decades apart? The different lives they had lived, the unspoken regrets that might have built up over time. He wondered if Tommy would even want to see him again. Would he remember the friendship the same way? Would he harbor resentment for years of silence? These fears gnawed at Ozzy, making him question whether he had the courage to face what lay ahead. To calm his racing mind, he turned to the visual mementos around him. Old concert footage played on his laptop. Ozzy on stage, wild and alive, with Tommy just out of frame, moving swiftly to adjust a mic or hand him a guitar. The movement was subtle, almost invisible, but Ozzy remembered every gesture. Each second of that footage brought back the energy, the camaraderie, the unspoken understanding between performer and roadie. Faded photographs added another layer. In one, Tommy held a massive amp overhead, laughing with Ozzy as if they had conquered the world. In another, they were backstage after a sold-out show, both drenched in sweat. Ozzy clapping Tommy on the shoulder with gratitude, and exhaustion mingled on his face. Even small diary entries, notes about set lists or jokes scribbled in the margins, spoke of a connection that had survived the chaos of life on the road. Ozzy closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. He could feel Tommy's energy, his humor, his loyalty, almost as if he were in the room again. He remembered the late night talks about music, dreams, and the simple pleasures that came from creating something together. Those memories reminded him that the bond they had formed wasn't fragile. It had been tested by tours, by fame, by time itself. And yet, the thought of reaching out now, after decades apart, carried a tension that was almost unbearable. The nights grew longer as Ozzy reflected. Sometimes he found himself talking to the photograph, whispering forgotten jokes, apologizing for years of lost contact. "I hope you remember the good times, Tommy," he murmured. "I hope you forgive me for disappearing." In those moments, nostalgia mingled with anxiety, creating a bittersweet cocktail of emotion. But amid the fear, there was also hope. The memories reminded Ozzy that friendship, loyalty, and shared history were hard to erase. No matter how long the silence had lasted, no matter how different their lives had become, the bond they had formed remained. Tommy had been a part of him, just as he had been a part of Tommy's story, and the possibility of reunion carried a spark of something Ozzy hadn't felt in years, a sense of completeness, a chance to honor the past. As the day of the meeting drew closer, Ozzy felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The memories he had revisited reminded him why this reunion mattered and why it had to happen. The laughter, the chaos, the pranks, the hard nights. They weren't just memories. They were proof of a bond that had survived time, distance, and life itself. And somewhere deep down, Ozzy knew that when he finally saw Tommy again, the memories wouldn't just come back, they would surge forward, filling the moment with the energy, humor, and loyalty that had defined their friendship from the very beginning. The weeks of searching had left Ozzy restless. Every phone call, every email, every social media message had been a thread pulled in every direction, yet none led directly to Tommy. He felt like a detective in a mystery of his own making, chasing a figure who had been such a constant presence once, only to disappear into the shadows of 40 years. Still, Ozzy refused to give up. One afternoon, while flipping through a stack of old tour contacts, a name caught his eye, an old drum tech who had worked with them in the mid-'80s. He hadn't spoken to him in decades, but there was an email address scribbled in the margin. Ozzy hesitated for a moment. He didn't know if it would work, didn't know if anyone would respond. But he typed a simple message. "Hi, it's Ozzy. I'm looking for Tommy, my old roadie. Do you know where he might be? It's been far too long." Hours passed. Ozzy tried not to think about it, distracting himself with rehearsals and phone calls. Just as he was about to close his laptop, a reply appeared. Short, cautious, but promising. "Ozzy, I think I can help. Tommy's been living quietly in a small town. I'll send you his contact, but please be careful. He's a private guy." Ozzy's heart raced. 40 years. After all the failed attempts, all the frustration, the missed opportunities, a tangible lead had finally appeared. He stared at the screen, the words blinking back at him, and felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Could it really be this easy? Or was it too good to be true? He didn't waste time. He called the number provided, trying to steady his voice. The line rang slowly, each ring echoing through his study like the heartbeat of a long-forgotten memory. Then, finally, a voice answered, a voice unfamiliar yet carrying a subtle familiarity that made Ozzy pause. "Hello? This is Ozzy. Ozzy Osbourne," he said carefully. "I'm looking for Tommy, my old roadie." There was silence, and then a faint laugh. "Ozzy. Ozzy Osbourne." Ozzy felt a lump in his throat. The voice had recognition in it, a trace of decades-old memory surfacing after years of silence. "Yes, it's me," he whispered. "It's been a long time. Oh, I want to see him. Is that possible?" After a few more minutes of cautious conversation, a tentative plan emerged. Tommy agreed to meet Ozzy, choosing a quiet cafe away from the bustle of the city, a neutral place, familiar enough to him, yet private enough to ease the nerves of two old friends, reconnecting after 40 years. As Ozzy hung up, he sank into his chair, emotions swirling. He had expected this moment to bring relief, but instead, it brought a strange mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and nostalgia. 40 years of memories, of shared laughter and struggles, suddenly seemed condensed into a single meeting. Would the bond still exist? Or would decades of silence have frayed the connection? He walked over to the wall, covered in old photographs, stopping at the one of Tommy holding an amp overhead backstage, laughing as if nothing could touch them. That single image had captured the essence of their friendship, unspoken, resilient, enduring. Ozzy ran his fingers over the faded edges, feeling the weight of time, but also the strength of the bond that had survived it. Preparations for the reunion were simple but deliberate. Ozzy chose clothing that was casual, something to convey respect and ease, avoiding the flamboyance of his stage persona. He wanted the meeting to be about them, not the legend he had become. He rehearsed in his mind what he might say, but he knew that no rehearsal could prepare him for the rush of memories, emotions, and stories that would flood back the moment they saw each other. As the day of the meeting approached, Ozzy's thoughts drifted to the countless tours, the backstage chaos, the endless nights of work, laughter, and mischief. He remembered the time Tommy had carried a whole drum kit up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator had broken, grinning the entire way. He remembered the practical jokes, the late-night conversations about music, life, and the world beyond the stage. There was also fear, though he tried not to dwell on it. What if Tommy had changed too much? What if time had hardened him, or worse, left resentment buried deep in his heart? Ozzy knew that people grow apart, lives diverge, and memories fade. But he also knew that some bonds, built on trust, loyalty, and shared experience, endure. He hoped, he prayed that theirs was one of them. The final hours before the meeting were filled with reflection. Ozzy revisited old concert footage, noting the small gestures, the ways Tommy had supported him without ever seeking recognition. Every memory reinforced why this reunion mattered, not for fame, not for stories to tell, but for the simple acknowledgement of a life shared and a friendship never truly forgotten. Finally, Ozzy packed a small notebook with some old photos and mementos, thinking they might spark conversation or laughter when they met. He grabbed the photo of Tommy that had started this entire journey, staring at it one last time, before slipping it carefully into his jacket. When he stepped out of the house that morning, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden light over the city. It felt symbolic, as if the day itself acknowledged the significance of what was about to happen. 40 years of memories, longing, and unanswered questions were about to converge in a single moment, and Ozzy felt a mix of nerves and exhilaration, unlike anything he had experienced on stage. This wasn't a concert. There was no screaming crowd, no roaring applause, no flashing lights. This was more personal, more intimate, more important. 40 years in the making, the lead had finally arrived. And with it, the chance to rediscover a friendship that time had never truly erased. Little did Ozzy know, the reunion would bring more than just nostalgia. It would reveal surprises, laughter, and truths that neither of them could have imagined, turning a simple meeting into a moment that would stay with them forever. The morning of the meeting arrived, and Ozzy felt a mix of nerves and anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. He dressed carefully, Casual, unassuming clothes, nothing flashy. This wasn't a concert. There would be no stage lights, no screaming fans. This was personal. 40 years of memories, laughter, and shared struggle all condensed into a single moment. And he wanted it to count. The cafe was quiet, tucked into a side street away from the usual bustle. Ozzy arrived early, choosing a table near the window, where the soft sunlight cast a warm glow across the polished wood. He ran his fingers over the old photograph of Tommy he had brought along, a small smile breaking through his nerves. He had pictured this moment countless times, during the weeks of searching, imagining their laughter, their jokes, the handshake that would reaffirm a bond stretched but never broken by time. Then he saw him, Tommy, older, yes, with lines around his eyes and a quiet strength in his posture, but unmistakably Tommy. The same mischievous grin lingered beneath the years, a spark that Ozzy remembered so well. For a heartbeat, they both froze, taking each other in, the years, the distance, the decades of life that had passed between them. Tommy, Ozzy said softly, voice thick with emotion. Ozzy, Tommy replied, a laugh breaking through the tension, nervous but genuine. I can't believe it's really you. And just like that, the years melted away. They shook hands. Tentative at first, then with growing warmth, as if they were testing whether this connection had survived time. The awkwardness faded, replaced by laughter, stories, and a flood of memories. They spoke for hours, recounting tales from the road. The backstage chaos, the long drives between cities, the endless sets, the jokes, and even the pranks that had sometimes gone too far. Ozzy laughed until his stomach ached, remembering the time Tommy had swapped his microphone mid-song with a squeaky toy, leaving him screaming in front of a packed crowd while the audience roared with confusion and delight. Tommy, in turn, shared stories Ozzy had long forgotten. The late nights spent fixing broken equipment, the quiet moments of encouragement when Ozzy felt exhausted and alone. These weren't just tales of work, they were reminders of the trust and loyalty that had defined their friendship. For both of them, those years on the road had been more than tours. They had been a shared life, forged in music, chaos, and camaraderie. Yet, amid the laughter, there were moments of silence. They paused, acknowledging the weight of 40 years apart. I can't believe we lost touch for so long, Ozzy admitted, voice tinged with regret. I should have tried harder. I should have found you sooner. Tommy shook his head, smiling through the faint glint of emotion in his eyes. We were young, busy, life happens. But you found me now. That's what matters. The conversation drifted from memories to the present. Tommy had built a quiet life, one far removed from the chaos of tours and fame. He spoke of his family, his work, the passions that had carried him through decades without the constant roar of crowds. Ozzy listened, proud and humbled. He realized that this reunion wasn't just about nostalgia. It was about reconnecting with someone who had been a constant support in a life that had often been overwhelming. Someone who had lived through the same storms and come out with strength intact. At one point, Ozzy pulled out the small notebook of old photographs he had brought. They flipped through it together, laughing and reminiscing. Each image, each memento, sparked a story, a memory, a shared joke that had survived the passage of time. It was as if the years had never existed. As the reunion drew on, there was a profound sense of peace between them. 40 years apart could never erase the foundation of trust, loyalty, and friendship they had built together. And yet, the day held more surprises. Tommy, with a twinkle in his eye, hinted at experiences and stories from the decades Ozzy had missed, adventures, hardships, and accomplishments that Ozzy had never known about. It became clear that while their paths had diverged, the bond they shared had continued to influence their ways, their lives. Neither of them fully understood, By the time the meeting ended, the sun was dipping low, casting a golden light over the cafe. Ozzy and Tommy stood outside, shaking hands one final time, but this time with the assurance that their connection was renewed. The years of silence had not diminished their friendship. If anything, it had made the reunion richer, deeper, and infinitely more meaningful. As Ozzy drove away, he glanced at the photograph one last time. The journey to find Tommy had been more than a search for an old roadie. It had been a journey back to himself, to the memories, laughter, and loyalty that had shaped him as a musician, a friend, and a human being. The reunion was not just a personal victory. It was a celebration of the enduring power of friendship. Little did Ozzy know the surprises of this reunion were not yet over. Tommy had stories that would astonish him, truths that would deepen their bond, and a twist in their decades. Long journey that nobody, including Ozzy, could have predicted. The reunion had already been emotional beyond what Ozzy had imagined. Laughter, nostalgia, and stories from the road filled the cafe, weaving a bridge across 40 years of absence. Yet, just as Ozzy began to think the day could not get any more meaningful, Tommy leaned back in his chair and looked at him with a quiet intensity that made Ozzy pause. Tommy began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "There's something you should know, something you might not expect after all these years." Ozzy's curiosity piqued. He had anticipated surprises, memories forgotten, anecdotes from tours gone by, but this tone suggested something deeper, more profound. "What is it, Tommy?" he asked, leaning forward. Tommy took a deep breath. "After you left the band and the tours ended, I didn't just go quiet. I kept working behind the scenes in music. I started my own small recording studio. And over the years, I've helped launch bands, produce albums, and even worked with artists you'd recognize. I guess you could say I've been making music in a different way, carrying the spirit of the tours we did together." Ozzy's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and admiration washing over him. 40 years had passed, and in that time, Tommy had built a legacy of his own, quiet, unheralded, but impactful. The man who had once carried amps and cracked jokes backstage had become a force in the music world, shaping careers while remaining largely invisible to the public eye. "And that's not all," Tommy continued, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I kept a journal, documenting every tour we did together. Every show, every prank, every late night, and every disaster. I wanted to remember it all, not just for myself, but for the people who come after us. You see, those memories, they're more than nostalgia. They're lessons in perseverance, loyalty, and friendship." Ozzy felt a lump in his throat. He had expected stories of hardship, perhaps a few humorous anecdotes, but a hidden legacy of music, mentorship, and chronicled history. It was overwhelming. He realized, in that moment, that the roadie he had once taken for granted had quietly shaped not just his own life, but the lives of countless others. Tommy reached into his bag and pulled out a small, worn journal, its leather cover cracked with age. "I thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing it to Ozzy. Ozzy turned the pages slowly, each one filled with meticulous notes, sketches, and memories. There were drawings of stage setups, comments on songs, and even personal reflections on the highs and lows of their tours. It was a chronicle of a life lived in music, written from the perspective of the man who had stood behind Ozzy through it all. As Ozzy read, he realized the true weight of what Tommy had done. While he had been the face of the music, Tommy had been the unseen backbone, documenting the journey, shaping experiences, and leaving a mark that went far beyond what anyone could see. Ozzy felt a surge of gratitude, guilt, and all at once. 40 years had passed, but the depth of Tommy's dedication and creativity made him feel like he had never truly left. Then Tommy smiled, leaning back with a twinkle in his eye. One more thing. Ozzy raised an eyebrow, bracing himself. I've been working on something special. A tribute to the tours we did, the stories, the chaos, the music, all of it. I wanted you to see it first. It's not just for me, or for the fans, but for us, the people who lived it. And he paused for dramatic effect. I think it might even go viral. Ozzy laughed, a genuine, relieved sound that echoed with disbelief and joy. You've really been busy, he said, shaking his head. And to think I almost didn't find you. Tommy chuckled, then grew serious. It wasn't about being found. It was about remembering. About making sure those years, those experiences, they mattered. In that moment, Ozzy realized something profound. The reunion was not just a personal journey, it was a story with universal resonance. Loyalty, friendship, perseverance, and the hidden contributions of those who work behind the scenes. These were things everyone could relate to. The world would be amazed by Tommy's story, and by extension, the bond they shared. As they left the cafe, the sunlight cast long shadows across the street, a visual reminder that the past and present were converging. They walked side by side, talking quietly, and Ozzy felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The search, the anticipation, the fear of losing a connection forever, it had all been worth it. Little did Ozzy know, this twist was only the beginning. Tommy's revelations would soon reach beyond their reunion, inspiring fans, musicians, and anyone who had ever lost touch with a friend. The story of the forgotten Roadie, the legacy hidden in plain sight, and the unbreakable bond of friendship after 40 years was about to take on a life of its own. For Ozzy, the day had begun as a simple search for an old friend. By the end, it had become a lesson in humility, gratitude, and the unexpected ways lives intersect and leave their mark. The reunion was complete, but the story that nobody expected, was just beginning to unfold. The reunion between Ozzy and Tommy didn't stay a quiet, private moment for long. As they left the cafe, their laughter and animated conversation caught the attention of a few onlookers. Someone snapped a photograph and shared it online, and within hours, the story began to spread. Fans, musicians, and even journalists picked up the tale of Ozzy finding his long-lost Roadie after 40 years. Social media erupted with reactions. Comments poured in. This is heartwarming. True friendship never fades. Tommy deserves all the recognition. The story resonated far beyond the music world. People connected not just with the reunion, but with the universal theme of lost friendships rediscovered, the importance of loyalty, and the unseen heroes behind every great journey. For Ozzy, it was surreal. He had spent weeks hunting for Tommy, navigating phone calls, emails, and social media clues, driven by a personal need to reconnect. He had not expected the world to take notice. Yet, as he read through fan reactions and saw clips of interviews with Tommy, he realized something profound. Their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever lost touch with someone important, everyone who had felt the sting of regret, and everyone who understood the quiet power of devotion, loyalty, and friendship. The buzz reached major outlets. Music magazines featured the reunion, highlighting Tommy's hidden legacy in producing and mentoring artists over the decades. Videos circulated showing Ozzy holding the journal Tommy had meticulously kept, documenting every backstage joke, every chaotic tour day, every late-night conversation. The world saw a side of Ozzy and Tommy that went far beyond rock and roll theatrics. They saw a genuine human connection, a bond that had survived the test of time. For Ozzy, the viral attention was secondary. The real reward was personal, emotional, and deeply grounding. He had reconnected with someone who had shaped his life in ways he hadn't fully appreciated until now. Tommy's presence reminded him of the importance of acknowledging the people who quietly support us. who carry us when the world gets heavy, and who remain loyal even when fame, distance, and time create gaps that feel impossible to bridge. In private, Ozzy reflected on the lessons this reunion had offered. He realized how easily life can sweep us apart from those who matter most, and how vital it is to act before years, or decades, slip away. Tommy's story was a testament to patience, resilience, and quiet dedication, and Ozzy felt privileged to witness it firsthand. The journal itself became a symbol. Ozzy began sharing excerpts during interviews, not for fame, but to illustrate the humanity behind the music. Stories of backstage chaos, mischief, and dedication resonated with aspiring musicians and fans alike. Each page carried the message that greatness is rarely achieved alone, that every tour, every concert, every high and low is shaped by a network of people working together, often unseen. The reunion also reignited Ozzy's own creativity. Inspired by Tommy's hidden legacy, he started revisiting old songs, considering collaborations, and reflecting on the tours that had defined him. He realized that connecting with the past could open doors for the future, that rekindling relationships could inspire, not just memories, but new beginnings. Social media continued to buzz with the viral story. People shared their own experiences of reconnecting with friends, mentors, and loved ones. The narrative of Ozzy and Tommy became more than a tale of a rock star finding a roadie. It became a movement, a reminder of the enduring power of loyalty, the joy of rediscovery, and the magic that happens when past and present converge. Before long, Ozzy returned to his study, placing Tommy's photograph and journal on his desk. He smiled, realizing that this wasn't the end of the story. It was a new chapter. The viral attention, the fan responses, the interviews, all of it was fleeting compared to the lasting impact of their friendship rekindled. He had found a part of himself in Tommy, a reflection of the person he had been on those chaotic tours, and a reminder that some bonds are timeless. Looking back, Ozzy understood the full weight of the journey, from the moment he discovered that photograph in the dusty box to the emotional reunion and the unexpected twist of Tommy's hidden accomplishments. He had experienced the profound truth that life is richer when we honor the people who share it with us. And while the world celebrated the viral story, Ozzy treasured the quiet moments, the laughter over old jokes, the shared memories, and the sense that, even after 40 years, friendship can endure, surprise, and transform. As the story of Ozzy and Tommy continued to circulate online, it became a source of inspiration. Fans were encouraged to reach out to old friends, to mend broken connections, and to cherish the bonds that time can never truly erase. The reunion reminded everyone that while fame and fortune are fleeting, loyalty, trust, and friendship are timeless. And in the quiet of his study, Ozzy whispered to himself, a smile touching his lips, "After 40 years, we found each other. And nothing could ever take that away."